Hi all, happy Monday. Welcome to the Wife of Caesar. My name is Michel Bien, or Michel Bien, either's fine. And we are happy to be with you. Okay, so as usual, as you know, the Wife of Caesar is Streiner's project to talk about corruption or anti-corruption using everyday words so that we can fight corruption in our day-to-day lives with a little bit more than just good intentions. Okay, as in every show, we will have a piece of news, a case, and a typology. In the news, we talk about the news. In the case, we talk about iconic cases dealing with corruption or anti-corruption. And in the typology, we teach you how to pay bribes. Okay, let's move on to the news. This week, the news deals with Basil Al-Jarrah. Now, Mr. Al-Jarrah is an executive for Unaoil, representing Unaoil in Iraq. And the news is that on Monday of this week, on July 15th, he pled guilty for bribery in the UK. Okay. What happened was, as you know, you've probably seen in the movies how you, at the beginning of a trial, you get to, plead either guilty or not guilty. Well, you can do that, and this is true, but you can also do that in the form of a deal, a contract, or an agreement. What Mr. Al-Jarrah did was he pled guilty to the authorities of the UK in exchange for certain conditions, which are, as of today, still undisclosed. Mr. Al-Jarrah was the partner of Unaoil, or an agent of Unaoil in Iraq. And for those of you who don't know, Unaoil is a company, a Monaco-based company, which has been involved in several corruption scandals and investigations since 2016. What they do is they do consulting for the oil industry, the oil and gas industry. Now, consulting is very, very broad, and as we've discussed before, Unaoil is allegedly one of those companies, one of those third parties whose business is the paying of bribes. You remember how we talked about Odebrecht and how Odebrecht had this entire department specifically devoted to paying bribes. Well, here Unaoil decided to exploit that business model, but to remove it or to outsource corruption. So what they do is they pay bribes for major companies. Now, among the clients that Unaoil has had are Samsung, Halliburton, the energy giant from the US, Hyundai, and Rolls-Royce, the motor giant from the UK. The investigation, as I discussed earlier, began in 2016, and the UK Serious Fraud Office, which is essentially the part of the UK government that investigates and prosecutes fraud, economic crime, including corruption and bribery. And they started the investigation in 2016. The investigation originally started with the owner of the company and his two sons, who have as of yet to be prosecuted. But the authorities found certain information, and among that information, they uncovered incriminating evidence against Al-Jarrah. Now, Al-Jarrah admitted to paying bribes in exchange for contracts awarded by the Iraqi government. Those contracts mainly dealt with infrastructure and infrastructure surrounding the oil industry, most notably the building of pipelines or oil pipelines in Iraq. And what's interesting is that, this is the first breakthrough that we've had in the that authorities have had in the Unaoil case or scandal. And the statements, the declarations of Mr. Al-Jarrah have spurred further investigations. The authorities are spinning off this investigation, as they did with the Odebrecht case, and looking into other companies that Unaoil might have represented in paying bribes to public officials. Among those companies is KBR, and KBR might sound familiar, and if it does, it's because we've already discussed KBR. We've talked about it in the context of the new refinery that's being built in Mexico. The government decided to directly invite several companies, and some of these companies were criticized for having been involved in corruption scandals. And as of today, KBR is the second company of those invited to bid for the refinery in Mexico that has been involved in some wrongdoing. Obviously, if we hear some more news, we will keep our eyes peeled and let you know. All right, let's move on to the case. Quick word on the cases beforehand. This week, Transparency International celebrated its 25th anniversary. So 25 years ago, TI was created. And to celebrate it, they published a list of the 25 most iconic corruption cases. And we're gonna do our best to do a run through of all of these cases because you might be interested and you might look at the list and say, well, I'd never heard about this. So here in the Wife of Caesar, we want to tell you about them. Some of them we have already covered, so we won't do a show on those, but most of them we will cover and it'll be fun. Okay, so today we have Siemens. Siemens is a huge case. Anyone who works in anti-corruption has heard and has studied the Siemens case. The Siemens case is massive in girth and in extent and in depth and in just about every measure that is of importance. So we will try to very briefly sum it up. If you want to read more about the Siemens case, Trace International publishes the Trace Compendium. Right here, there's a link for it below. And in the Trace Compendium, you can find the Siemens case relatively summarized. I say relatively because the summary is huge, but it's much smaller than the case files, of course. So if you want to learn more about the Siemens case in detail, please feel free to check out the Trace Compendium publication. Okay, so how did it work? First of all, what does Siemens do? Siemens is a company from Germany originally. Now it's a global company, and they do engineering. Anything surrounding engineering, whether it's products, services that require advanced engineering, Siemens does. So whenever you require advanced tech, you might find that Siemens can supply what you need. Okay. Now, in 2006, it was uncovered that there had been a bribery scheme that spanned the entire world, and in the center of that was Siemens. Now, starting in the 90s, Siemens admitted and has admitted to this day, so it's proven, that it paid around $1.4 billion US in bribes to obtain contracts with public officials from around the world. Now, Siemens, for this scheme, was fined around $1.6 billion US, which is a huge amount. As of yet, it's one of the largest amounts paid in disgorgement and fines for corruption. Now, Siemens, back in the 90s, this was way before serious enforcement of the FCPA and other laws like it, way before the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention really took off. So back then, Siemens had codes of conduct and anti-corruption codes and even a compliance program. But back then, it was really perfunctory. It was mostly aesthetic in nature. It was only on paper. Now, the bribes that Siemens paid to do business back then were not strictly illegal under German law, so it felt comfortable doing that. And some of the employees that were in Siemens at the time have made statements saying that it was business as usual for Siemens. Essentially, one person even went as far to say that they paid bribes for everything except their lamp industry, their lamp business. So everything that Siemens did was done through bribes. Now, and again, this was legal at the time in Germany, but then Siemens became listed in the New York Stock Exchange, and that meant that it became subject to the FCPA, to Sarbanes-Oxley, which was in the midst of being enacted, and the U.S. Securities Law of 1934. So essentially all of the major laws that regulate public companies, publicly traded companies. And back then, there was somebody blew the whistle. Somebody made an anonymous report. The authorities started investigating. The authorities, specifically in the U.S. and Argentina, started investigating Siemens, and that led to the involvement of the German authorities back then. And these authorities found that Siemens paid again $1.4 billion in bribes in around 4,200 bribes, a little bit more, but essentially a bunch of bribes. And I will tell you a little bit more about how they did it in a minute. Essentially, the company was paying off public officials in most continents, Asia, Africa, Europe, Middle East, and the Americas, to obtain contracts in the telecom industry, in the energy sector, where Pemex was actually named and Pemex officials were actually named, but nothing came to fruition back then. Color me surprised. Public transportation, healthcare, infrastructure, and so on and so forth. Most notably, Siemens was involved in the oil for food scandal in Iraq, which we have covered before. And essentially, Siemens single-handedly caused over $1 billion to be paid to the regime of Saddam Hussein. So lovely. They did this via cash desks, which we will discuss in detail in a minute. And what happened then is, again, an international investigation arose and an enforcement deal was struck with the authorities in Germany, Argentina, the US, and other countries in which Siemens was found guilty of paying bribes. And to be quite honest, the Siemens case laid the foundations for a lot of what is modern anti-corruption law, so we have to be thankful for that. But of course, it was a horrible, horrible scandal. Let's move on to the typology. How did Siemens do it? Today, our typology comes from the Siemens case, and Siemens, during this scandal, they paid their bribes using what they called cash desks. Cash desks were essentially what Siemens did is the international group, set up a company, a subsidiary that only dealt with its real estate business. This is very common because these companies become so large, they are so massive that they need different arms to deal with different aspects of the business. Otherwise, it becomes unwieldy and really impractical. So this is fairly normal. This is completely normal. Now, this company, Siemens Real Estate Group, set up offices around the world wherever they did business, which was actually fairly convenient for Siemens to use in this bribery scheme. Now, the group as a whole had several bank accounts, and a lot of these bank accounts allegedly or supposedly were only used to make payments among members of the group, of the same company, group of companies. And this is, again, fairly normal. This is what we call related parties. One company of the group makes a payment to another company in the group, and they each keep separate accounting records, which again is fairly normal. Now, in reality, these accounts were used to withdraw money in cash, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars, in each country where Siemens needed to pay a bribe. The money was then delivered to employees of a different company, of Siemens Communications Group, and sometimes the amounts were so large that the employees had to carry out the cash in suitcases filled with money, like you see in the movies. And the employees then used that money to pay the bribe to the public official. Those payments were then recorded in Siemens accounting records and even deducted from taxes as what was called useful expenditures, which again was legal in Germany until 1999. What happened in 1999? Well, Germany joined the OECD World Group on Bribery, and they signed the Anti-Bribery Convention. It has a very, very long name, but it's just think of it, it's an international treaty against corruption. And the Anti-Bribery Convention, specifically, one of the things that it mandates, it prohibits that countries make it legal to deduct bribes. So if you join the convention, you have to make it illegal for someone in your country to make bribes deductible from taxes. Okay, and that's pretty much how they did it. Okay, so that's it for today. Thank you for joining us. This was the Wife of Caesar, and I will leave you, as I do in every episode. If you find corruption, if you come across an act of corruption, please blow the whistle, but do so safely. If you're not sure whether or not what you're looking at is corruption, or you're not entirely certain that you are physically safe, don't do anything. Reach out to people who can help you. Reach out to us at info@streiner.mx, and we will be glad to help you. You can also visit our website, where you will find specific instructions on how to make anonymous reports electronically, so that you can you guarantee your safety. So above all, please stay safe. Also, remember to like, to share, and to comment, and I will see you next week. Have a happy Monday.